Welcome, friends, to the Pioneers of the Independent Networks. I'm your host, Ricky Blues. This is your co-host, Lord Timothy Walker. Tim, how are you feeling this week?
I'm doing well. You look like you're on fire.
Yes, I am. As a matter of fact, it's always hot whenever you're around.
Well, I'm glad I have that effect.
You do. You turn up the heat. You are a heat miser.
I try to generate a little bit of heat.
Yes, you do. And friends and fans, if you've joined us in the past, you know that we bring to you all the characters, the matches, the promotions, the feuds that populated the Mid-Atlantic independent wrestling scene from the 1970s to today. And boy, do we love digging into the archives.
I do. I think it's a lot of fun.
It is. It is. And Tim, this week, we have a very different topic to talk about. But before we tell them what the topic is, where are we coming from to address this topic?
Maybe we're coming from a Wrestling Hall of Fame.
From a Wrestling Hall of Fame. I like it. Apropos. From the Wrestling Hall of Fame. Wherever it may be, it is the Wrestling Hall of Fame. Awesome. So with that, Tim, what is our topic? Now that we're looking at and the fans are saying I have boots out of the bag, what is our topic going to be for this week?
This week, let's talk about a very touchy subject for some, perhaps.
Okay.
But let's talk about, when do you know it's time to hang up those boots?
When it's time to put the boots back into the bag, throw the zipper on, and let them stay forevermore.
A lot of people have a hard time doing that. But I think everything has a shelf life.
Right?
And I think at some point, you have to realize that your best days are behind you. And it's time to hang them up. This is not exclusive to wrestling.
No, I agree. You're right.
I mean, think about back in the day when it was time for Brooks Robinson to call it a day.
Right.
And think about how hard it was for Earl Weaver. Earl Weaver, a hardened manager.
Yep.
Who wasn't exactly sentimental.
Right.
Had to go to Brooks Robinson, and Earl was in tears when he told Brooks that they didn't have room on the roster for him anymore.
The way that I look at it is sometimes for each of us in the profession, and in any, like you said, in any profession, you do have a moratorium on your ability to perform at an acceptable, and that's the key, the acceptable rate for a paying customer. So I look at it, and it's always hard to face that mortality because you always say to yourself, I know I have, I got one more good run in me. You know, just give me the right material to do, and I've got one more good run in me. And I think it's very difficult for a professional to face the mortality of this business as far as being a performer, that you need to step away. I'll talk about a side of it that might be a little bit different too, Tim, as we progress through this, and that is almost the addiction of this business. So I'll hit a little bit on that angle.
Well, let's start with you.
Mm-hmm.
Since you're an accomplished professional wrestler, and you competed for how many years?
So for me, I got in '89 being trained. And then I had my first professional match August 10th, 1990. And then my retirement match, which I never knew was my retirement match, was a little bit more than 10 years later. So almost an 11-year where I was wrestling, I don't want to say continuous because there was times I had to take breaks from injuries, but an 11-year period where I did a lot of wrestling. I went dormant for a period of time, came back for the Legend shows, from about 2001 to like 2009. Just nothing. Lived my life, enjoyed it, let my health regenerate. About 2009, they started doing the whole Legends. So they started contacting me again and got me involved and got my son involved. And I did that for the 4 or 5 year period for there, but it wasn't regular like it was for those first 11 years. But I can tell you, those first 11 years when I had my last match, and I didn't know that it was my last match, um, it came on me one day. It's like, I've had enough. I've got to step away. It's starting to consume me. I'm starting to feel as it's too much of a pull for me in so many directions that I don't want to, as a human, go. And that goes to that dark side of that addiction, where you don't have to have controlled substances to be addicted to something. Your body produces everything, every type of drug that is out there, the same effects your body already produces. So when you artificially replace those with like that roar of the crowd and the pop of the crowd or the excitement, then your body no longer produces it as much, and you need to generate it through those things. So it becomes an addicted type of thing. And I felt I'd started to get into that area where I just didn't like that. That wasn't who I was. And I knew that I needed to step away. The good thing was I'd plateaued at a certain point. Right? So I didn't get to the WrestleManias and all those types of things. Other folks do. And it's much more, the feeling that I went through for them, it's much more 100-fold exacerbated. So I understand that. And you always say to yourself, when you look back, I have one more run. I have one. And I didn't want that because I had a whole nother profession that I was working with and dealing. But those 11 years, I look back at, and I had fabulous, fantastic memories. But I also knew that, you know what, maybe it is time to step away.
So you thought that rather than let the business consume you,
Yes.
you would control how involved you wanted to be in it.
Exactly. And I think because I had another profession, it offered me an escape clause, if you understand what I'm saying. Tim, if I didn't have that other profession and this was my sole source of income, then it's that much more difficult to walk away, because it's no longer the stroke of the ego. It is also a paycheck. I mean, you become just like someone who is remanded to the House of Corrections. You become institutionalized. You only know one way, and that is it. And it's much more difficult for folks who've done it as a full-time, as opposed to me as the part-time, as someone who was in there for years but had other sources and means.
Personally, I think I've seen some people who were caught up in that whirlwind,
Right.
who couldn't see outside of that realm.
Right.
That was where their vision began and ended. They could only see so much.
Right. There was no peripheral.
And I think that's where a lot of people ended up in a bad way.
Consumed by those demons that were just nipping at their heels, but were never able to get to them until you right to that point. And then that's when they were consumed.
Rather than controlling themselves, they let the wrestling control how they acted.
Right.
And that caused some real tragedies.
Absolutely.
The people that would live the wrestling 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, I think you're right. It was an addiction. It was a sickness. They got caught up too much into their characters,
Mm-hmm.
and lost sight of themselves.
Right.
Rather than look at wrestling as a job, people end up looking at it as a lifestyle.
Right. And it really does. It becomes a house that has no door or no window. You don't go out. That is your house. And no matter how far you travel in this business, when you're that deep in, you are confined by that house. You don't know what the outside is like. You've lost touch with that because you're consumed by. For me, I didn't want that. I saw that starting to happen, and I knew No, I needed to step away. So that's when I said I had to be in control of it because it is a slippery slope. We could sit here and name the names of all the boys and the ladies that we've lost because it's consumed, but it's not. That's not what it's about. For me, that's when I knew, and we can always use that when that is there. That's when you should realize you have to step away when that sickness starts to overcome you.
That's very interesting. That we have people that are so consumed by it that has caused tragedies time after time, and people haven't learned the lesson
Right.
from that. That's very disturbing to me. So to look at it as part of your life rather than as your life,
The whole of.
I think it's very important to have that distinction.
Right. My cautionary tale for that, Tim, would be this. As a young, aspiring person who wants to get into the business, everyone works so hard on an entry plan, right? We need to have the professionals that are in this business that have been there, done that, teaching these young kids coming up that not only is there an entry plan, but you better have an exit plan or you will be consumed. This is a creature, a demon that can consume you. So just as hard as you work on your entry plan to get there, to move along, you got to have an exit plan to exit back into your life at an acceptable rate where you can still live. You know, you don't want to be crippled. And that was another thing that bothered me. The injuries. I mean, Ed Hall broke his, Ed DeWitt broke his neck in this business. You know, how many times have we seen Chris Candido broke his leg that led to his ultimate demise with an embolism? Little things like that. To this day, I still have all the woes of the bad knees, the bad hips, the bad ankles from the business. But I can get through life without having to be chemically dependent on something to get me through life. Some folks go beyond the point of where their body can take it, and all of a sudden, the quality of life after this business or after that light has finished shining on you is so diminished that the quality isn't really worth living.
So was there one actual point where that light went off and you said, this is my time, this is it?
For me, it was just a culmination of so many different things. You know, so many, a lot of politics that was surfacing in the locker room. Me not being able to perform as fast and as fluent as I once did. You know, with the style that I was doing. I have to hit that Super Frankensteiner because that's what Ricky Blues does. Well, it doesn't matter that I'm rolling over on, the vertebrae that are compressing. That's what you got to, and you start to reason out those things to make it almost like it's acceptable.
I think it was important that you could see the bigger picture.
Right.
That you saw.
For me.
That there was life outside of wrestling.
Right.
And also, by doing this show, you can still establish a connection to wrestling.
Right, absolutely, and we still do.
Enjoy it.
Right. It is still, that business is still enjoyable for me because of that. And I think the greater message of this episode is exactly that. When you no longer enjoy it, that may be another clue for you that you need to get out because you've been consumed. It is now no longer something you love to do, right? If you love your work, you'll never work a day in your life. Well, when you've fallen out of love with that, and believe me, you fall in and out of love in wrestling, then it becomes a job. And that job then is like Ebenezer Scrooge. You're forging your chain in life that you'll bear after the life of wrestling.
And usually, your jobs don't know how to love you back.
Right. You never get out of what you've put into.
You may love your job, right, but it may not love you.
Back. And that's the toil of it, exactly. If we're looking, Tim, aside from the way that I looked at it, and I was able to say I've stepped out of that business. A lot of guys haven't been fortunate to say that and are there. For me, when I look at the guys that have had 15, 20, 30, 100 retirement matches and have retired 12 different times, you need to ask yourself, how much more do I have to give? Because there is a point that what you give, that all of that you have given, now starts to be diminished by you failing to understand that you need to separate and move away so that all that you've given can resonate.
It just becomes so routine that maybe it's not appreciated like it once was.
Right.
It just becomes, let's get up at 8 o'clock and go to work.
Right.
It just becomes so rote that you lose that special feel about it. And so you're lucky in that respect that you still had a fondness for it when you left, and you didn't have a debilitating injury
Right.
that forced you out, that you were able to leave on your own terms. I see a lot of people getting older in the business too, and aside from injuries, they get to a point where their relationships with promoters that they've worked for all through the years get diminished.
Right.
Just say, for instance, that I've worked for Dick Karakoff for years and years and years and years, and now Dick Karakoff has retired. Or I've worked for Larry Sharp and Dennis Carluzzo in New Jersey for years and years and years, and now they're gone. And you haven't maintained relationships with newer promoters. I see that happening to people, and then I'm slowly fading out as time goes on as well.
And the greatest failure for you as an athlete is when you don't recognize you don't have it anymore. I mean, and it's tough.
About 4 or 5 years ago, a friend and I went to a rather big independent event which advertised a lot of former 80s WWF superstars.
Right.
And we had a good feeling about this going into it. Wow, we'll get to see these legends again. And unfortunately, when we left that night, we didn't share the same feelings that we did when we were going into it.
Right.
We didn't see the same people that we remembered.
Right.
So it left kind of a sad taste in our mouth. And the promoter really didn't have any idea of how to manipulate the card to bring out the best in these legends. Rather, it made them look...
It put them in a wrong light.
In a bad light, right. And you could see the crowd. It was a really good crowd that night, too. Probably somewhere between 800 and 1,000 people. And as they all shuffled out at the end of the night, it just was like someone let the air out of a balloon.
Right. And Tim, I think your sentiment there leads into exactly what I want to say. And that is, even when you have stopped performing in the ring, right, there is room for things for you to do. Look at all the conventions today. And can you generate, for those who have to live by it, money in that same vein? And the answer is yes. And I think that also doesn't diminish your shine the way that performing in a ring at 65 years old would. It almost, and I hate to use this, but it almost becomes where you think, as a person, as a spectator, please don't let them get hurt. I don't want to see them get hurt. You almost feel sorry
that they're hanging on to something that
right,
isn't there.
Right, and it's not there, and it shouldn't be. When there's so many other venues that they can do without diminishing those accomplishments.
Now, I do understand that these older stars still have some star power left.
Right, something to give.
They do have something to give. It may not be the same thing that they gave before, but they still have something to contribute there. What do you think is the best way an independent promoter can highlight that sort of thing?
And that is a great question. And for me, Tim, it's simply presenting those legends to the fans in a meet and greet, in a signing at intermission, at special events like what you used to do in the old square circle fan clubs, the luncheons and those types of things. Because, ladies and gentlemen, the image of the people that you see in those rings and those endeared characters are usually an extension of who they are. So when you actually get a chance to sit and meet and talk with those folks, the knowledge that they have, that they can just in an instant, recall and talk to you about, is well worth the price of admission in itself.
In a case of an independent promoter, sometimes they'll want that big star to come out and make that appearance in the ring so that everyone can see them and they don't have to stand in a long line to see the star, and to get that big pop. Now, how to go about getting that big pop, I think, is sometimes the hard question.
Right, the hard question.
But in my experience, I've seen that you may not want to see wrestler X wrestle an entire match.
Right.
But if you can set up a scenario where that wrestler can come out and do the one signature move that they're known for and get that pop and then get them out of the ring after that point, I think that sometimes is a nice way to go about doing that.
Yeah, it can blow the roof off of the building. It absolutely can. And it keeps them strong. It keeps their memory strong. And it gives the fans what they're looking for without diminishing and allowing them to hurt themselves. Not just physically, but the value.
It's interesting that there are a lot of things that former wrestlers can get involved with, either in wrestling or outside of wrestling. For instance, people becoming color commentators, people becoming managers, people becoming bookers. I think some of the best bookers are former wrestlers who are retired that don't have any personal interest in themselves as to what's going on in the ring.
Look at Tony Garea. Tony Garea had an incredible career in the ring, right? But look at him as a talent coordinator in all those years, those subsequent years. We're talking 30, 40 years after his ring career. I mean, and that is incredible, but it harkens to exactly what you're saying.
There's a lot outside of wrestling, too. I mean,
right?
People have ventured into politics, even.
My bottom line, Tim, when I look at it, when I know it's time to put the boots back into the bag, close that bag, and let it stay there forevermore, like I said, when I knew that I could no longer physically give the fans what they paid for.
And you have to realize that there's more to life than just what's inside the ring.
Yeah, we're all not 25 forever.
Boy, we wish we were.
You're not kidding. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're thanking you for joining us on this very sobering, down-to-earth kind of episode, but one that, again, very few people talk about, but we need to. We like to hit all angles here at PIN, and this is one of those ones that's been out there for years and no one really addresses. And I think that it's a good thing to get this information out, to put a perspective on it. So we're thanking you for joining us this week. We're hoping that you again join us next week. As Tim, we take that stroll
down Concussion Lane.
Down Concussion Lane. Hey, Tim, concussions happen in the ring. So sometimes when you have a few of those concussions, it might be time to step away so you're not doing yourself the dirty later in life.
That's a good thought.
Good thought. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you next week.